Hi, Kristin Woodson here, Customer Success Manager with DataSet. In this video, we'll walk you through how to use the DataSet add-on for Splunk. Now, this video is covering the use of the DataSet add-on. We are assuming that you've already installed the add-on. I will put a link below that will take you to the Splunk add-on section. If you do need assistance in installing the add-on, don't hesitate to reach out to us at support@dataset.com. Also, as a prerequisite, we do recommend that you go through our DataSet new user training. I will also put a link below to our new user training knowledge base article. I would recommend at the very least watching the Introduction to DataSet Search and Graph videos, as well as some of our Power Query Quick Start videos to help you get started with DataSet. Getting that understanding of how DataSet works can really help you when understanding the DataSet add-on in Splunk. So this is where we recommend coming here and just watching these videos before jumping into our Splunk DataSet add-on. So let's now take a look at our DataSet add-on in Splunk. In order to get to the DataSet add-on, underneath my apps here, I'm going to click on DataSet add-on for Splunk. It will automatically take me to the configuration tab. Now, again, this is kind of more needed for the installation portion, but one thing to note, just in case you need to know where to find them, if you do need to find a DataSet API key, you would do that by logging into DataSet. On the right-hand side under your username, you can select API key, and this is where you can add a read or a write key in your DataSet account. Once it's added, then all you would need to do is copy the key, and you can then come back and add that into the configuration if needed. Again, this is more kind of on the install side of things, and we're covering how to use the add-on here, but I did want to just show that just in case it's useful. If you don't see anything here, don't be alarmed. You may have read-only access. So now I'm going to click on my Singularity Data Lake by Example dashboard. This dashboard was created to help you get started. The first thing to note here is we can see our Show Connection Test results. If I don't see that panel, if I check this box, now I can see my API connection test. So I can see that data is being returned, so I know that I am connected. So it's a good way to just check and make sure you're connected before we start querying. I'm actually just going to uncheck Show Connection Test Results. And the first thing you need to know is that the add-on provides 4 methods to query data. The first one is a base data query, and this will return the raw event data. You then have a power query, which will aggregate data by any supported operator, so things like sum, count, average, and so on, and return summary level statistics. We have a facet query, which will summarize data by a specific field and return the summary level statistics for the most common values of the field. And we also have a Timeseries query. This will calculate numeric values over time for repeated queries and summaries and allow pre-computed results. So let's get started searching. I'm going to click on one here on my base data query. To get raw events, we automatically have a search set up for you. This is searching for the last 4 hours. We're showing you the max 10 rows of data amongst all servers. And you can see here the base query is our server host equals, and then we've got our wildcard here to show that we have our server host equals all. If I change this, let's say to app server 1, you'll see that now I have my base query that says server host equals app server 1. So we're automatically generating that search for you. And if we break down our search here, you'll notice again we've got our SPL at the start, which is the Splunk processing language. You can see our DataSet method equals query. Our search is we're saying where server host equals app server 1. And max count equals 10. And you'll notice that we have an S path at the end. Anytime Splunk deals with JSON, you have to add the S path command at the end of it so that it parses out the different fields correctly. And if we scroll down, you'll notice now that I have my columns and I have different pages. So if I click on the next page, I can't see my 10 rows of data on the one screen. I can just easily go back and forth through my pages. I can open this in search. I can export it. I can inspect it. And we'll talk about the inspect a little bit later towards the end when we go over some tips and tricks. And I can see when this search was last done, which was 2 minutes ago. If I click on refresh, now you'll see I've just been able to refresh that search as well. So one thing to note with searching is if you are using the DataSet add-on to run a base query search, if you know exactly what you're looking for and you're narrowing down your search, DataSet add-on is the best place to come to. But if you're not quite sure what you're looking for and you know your search could potentially return thousands and thousands of rows of results, the best place to search in that case would be searching through DataSet. Once you've narrowed down your search so that you have an idea of what you're looking for, it's better to then you could copy and paste that search and bring it back into the Splunk DataSet add-on. So that's just something to keep in mind when we're thinking about searching, as DataSet will be more performant when it comes to larger searches. You can still do the search in Splunk, but it just may be a little bit slower in returning those results. So now let's go back and set our server hosts to all server hosts. And I now want to scroll down and run a Power Query. So right off the bat here, we can see we're running a DataSet Power Query. This will allow us to run a search on the raw data and perform calculations on that data. In this example, we're grouping the data and counting by the tag field. We also have SPath and table tag count, which gives me a count and a tag. So this is the data that is coming back from DataSet in Splunk. Just as a reminder, there is the Power Query's Quick Start series that is in the knowledge-based article that's linked below this video if you want to get into more information on Power Queries. So we can dive in a little further now by opening our query in our search. And there is a visualization page. This is where we can start to do some really cool visualizations. There are thousands of custom visualizations you can choose from. But before we do that, let's just quickly talk about our query here. Everything from DataSet forward is a query that is bringing in the data from DataSet. Anything from SPath forward is coming in from Splunk. So you can combine two queries. So once we pull in the first line that is bringing in the DataSet data, I then apply my Splunk commands to the results returned from DataSet. Now we're going to click on visualization. And this is where I can change from my bar chart to a column chart, or I can do a line chart, a bubble one. We've got a heat map. So there's several different visualizations to choose from. So I've just switched this to my column chart. And now if I wanted to save this as a dashboard, or I can save it as a report, I can save it as an existing dashboard or as a new dashboard. The other thing I can do here is click on events. So if you get this message, your search didn't return any events because you're in fast mode, I'm just going to click on search on verbose mode. And this is returning the results of the Power Query, which gives me the count and the tag. And again, similarly, you can save this as a report, save it as an existing, or save this to a dashboard as well, if that's helpful. So that is taking a look at our Power Queries. Now let's go back to our dashboard. And next what we'll do is we'll take a look at our Facet Query. Now if we remember, the Facet Query will summarize data by a specific field and return the summary level statistics for the most common values of the field. There are two ways to hyper-optimize searches. What we just saw with Power Queries and sometimes a lighter usage of queries are for the most part what you'd use in Splunk. Those Power Queries specifically are able to do aggregate statistics, counts by fields over time. So we'll get the most of the results that we need. However, over exceptionally large volumes of data, there are two more methods that we can use to hyper-optimize our searches and return numerical statistics over and over again. The first one would be a facet, which is going to give us a count by field name. So a moment ago we saw a Power Query against DataSet. And if we use that in Splunk, we would say stats count by field name. It works, but it's not the most performant because we have to pull the raw data back from DataSet to Splunk and then have Splunk do the search, do the analysis on the data, and present the results. In the second methods of Power Query, we push that data or that logic to Sentinel-1 and return the results to Splunk, which is much more performant. But if we have very large volumes of data, for anyone who is a current Splunk user, you may be used to doing things like T-stats, which look at metadata instead of the raw data. This is a similar hyper-optimization. We are using a method of facet. We then define the field in which we want to slice the data. So in this example, it's going to be tag. This could also be things like IP, address, users, or anything that we want to count by field name. We'll then define a search in this example. We're using the DataSet method facet, looking for the field tag. We're searching for server host equals the wildcard, which equals all server hosts. And then we're still going to use our spath command to parse the JSON results when it comes back from Sentinel-1. The default name is going to be value. So in this case, I'm going to rename the field value to what I want it to be in Splunk. So in this case, I've renamed it as tag. And then I will present a table of those results. So this is an extremely performant way to get statistical count by tag. Instead of doing stats count by tag in Splunk, I'm simply using a Facet Query against Sentinel-1. Last but not least, we have our Timeseries Query, which will calculate numeric values over time. For repeated queries and summaries, it'll allow pre-computed results. If we look at the example we have here on the dashboard, if we have a time series with a numerical value, we can push that time series logic as well. So instead of querying data from Sentinel-1 and then doing time, chart, count by a field in Splunk, we'll use time series as a method. So it's the same examples that we saw previously, but now what we're going to do is we're going to define a function. So in this case, we're defining the function rate. There are mathematical functions such as minimum, maximum, average, P95, and we can return the results for those functions. Again, in this case, we're doing rate. Next, we have to return the number of buckets. This would be synonymous with bins in Splunk. In this case, I'm going to query over 24 hours, so I will have 24 buckets yielding 1 per hour. We will see two fields. One is create summaries, The next one is only use summaries. These are saying that on the Sentinel-1 side, there's something called the summary service, and for repeat queries, such as in this dashboard that we would run over and over, if these are run reoccurring, Sentinel-1 will create what's called a summary service and actually hold the values in memory at ingest time as the data flows into the platform. This means that when we run a query, and if we say true, first we'll create a summary for it, and then we'll only use summaries. It will no longer query the raw data directly. It will simply query in the memory aggregate statistics that come in. So once we have a search that we are for sure that we want to use, we'll create that summary, and then going forward, we can say only use summaries, and we'll no longer look at the raw data anymore. This will return the results extremely fast because we are no longer querying the raw data. The only caveat would be if we have gaps where I try to only use summaries. So say for in this case, I want to query for 24 hours. If I were to only use summaries, I may have that summary created 1 hour ago. I'll need to give it time to build out the summary service to match the period that I wanted to query over. The last two items here, we still use spath, as always, to parse the JSON. And finally, in Splunk, we'll do our familiar syntax of a time chart. So this is going to show us our rates of the data that's coming into Sentinel-1 per hour for anything that matches server host equals wildcard, which means server host equals all. In this particular time series API call, we do want to specify how many buckets. So one caveat is I would have to know ahead of time how many results I want to return. So hopefully this was helpful. I think the biggest thing to reinforce here is that we typically would look to push much of the aggregate logic to DataSet, especially the power queries. Some additional tips and tricks. When you're building out dashboards, if you are using time series, if you build out the same dashboard in DataSet, then the results will come in even faster when building that time series within Splunk as well. Also, when you're searching, if you're running into any slowness, you can open the Inspect Job window. So to get to the Inspect Job window, we'll do it from our Power Query here. I would just click on the Inspect here. And the window may pop up off screen, so just be conscientious of that. You'll be able to see the breakdown of what's happening. If you are experiencing any slowness, what you could do is then, copy and paste this and send this on to the support team. So it's always just useful to know that you can inspect and see what's happening here. One other thing worth mentioning is once you're building out your queries in DataSet, if you are going to copy and paste the information from DataSet into Splunk, as a best practice when building the queries in DataSet, it's best to use single quotes. In DataSet, you can use double quotes as well, but if you use the single quotes, then when you copy and paste that over to Splunk, you won't have to escape out the double quotes. In Splunk, you'd have to escape the double quotes. So again, just something to keep in mind. Hopefully this helps in getting started with the DataSet add-on. Again, please refer to any links below. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at support@dataset.com. Thank you for watching the video.